All right, let's jump right in. In late 2025, the Trump administration rolled out three massive moves that, at first glance, seemed totally disconnected. But here's the thing, they're actually all part of one single playbook. We're going to break down how a symbolic name change, a cash payment to soldiers, and a new war on government spending all connect to reveal a pretty radical new vision for America.
Okay, let's start right here with this quote from the Secretary of Defense, Pete Hegseth. Because this one sentence, this is really the key that unlocks everything else we're going to talk about. It's not just some off-the-cuff remark, it's the entire justification for a complete overhaul of the U.S. military, starting with its name.
First up, the most visible change, renaming the Department of Defense. This is all about sending a really powerful message, both to folks at home and, of course, to the rest of the world. And here's where it gets interesting. This wasn't done through a new law passed by Congress. Nope, it was an executive order. Now, that means the legal name is still technically Department of Defense, but the White House ordered every single federal agency to start calling it the Department of War in all official business.
And when you look at the history here, you see this isn't a new name at all. It's the original name. That changed to defense way back in 1947. That was a very specific signal about Cold War strategy. So changing it back now is an equally intentional message. That era and that whole philosophy is over.
The administration's whole argument really boils down to this. Words matter. They say this name change signals a brand new focus on what they're calling maximum lethality, not tepid legality. The whole idea is to win wars, win them quickly and decisively, instead of getting bogged down for years and years.
Okay, so let's move to the next piece of this puzzle and see how it all builds, because it's not just about rebranding the department, it's also about directly rewarding the people in it with something they called a warrior dividend.
So picture this. In a primetime address in December 2025, President Trump announced this one-time payment, and the amount, $1,776, was absolutely chosen on purpose to honor the year of America's founding. It's all about tying this payment directly to national identity and patriotism. So who actually got this cash? Well, it was targeted at the vast majority of the force. We're talking over 1.45 million troops, from a brand new private all the way up to colonels and Navy captains. But, and this is key, it deliberately stops just short of the top brass, so no generals, no admirals. Right, but where did the money come from? It wasn't new funding from Congress. That $2.6 billion was pulled directly from a fund that was supposed to be for military housing and quality of life programs. So, in other words, long-term housing support was basically traded for a one-time cash payment. Now, at the exact same time all this was happening, the administration unleashed something else entirely, an entity with the total opposite mission, not to spend money, but to slash it. It was called the Department of Government Efficiency, or, you guessed it, DOGE.
And yeah, you've heard that right. It was co-chaired by Elon Musk and Vivek Ramaswamy. DOGE's stated goal was to slash over $500 billion in annual federal spending. And their main target? Spending they claimed was unauthorized by Congress or being used in ways that Congress never intended.
Okay, but this chart is fascinating because it reveals this huge gap between what DOGE talked about publicly and where the actual money is. They'd often point to smaller targets like public broadcasting, but the single biggest pot of this so-called unauthorized money, by a long shot, was for veterans' health care, to the tune of $119 billion. And DOGE's plan wasn't just about cutting programs. It was also about cutting people. They laid out this three-pronged strategy to shrink the federal workforce. We're talking mass firings, relocating whole agencies out of D.C., and ending remote work. They even predicted these moves would cause a wave of voluntary terminations. So you've got a military rebrand, a cash payment for troops, and this all-out war on government spending. But these moves aren't free, They don't happen in a vacuum. So let's look at the real costs and the consequences. According to congressional sources, the estimated cost just to implement the Department of War name change is just staggering. We're talking nearly $2 billion. That's to update everything from signs at 4,800 facilities around the world to IT systems, legal documents, you name it. And you can bet that price tag drew immediate and really sharp criticism. A group of Democratic lawmakers basically called it a hypocritical use of taxpayer money, arguing it prioritized political theater at the exact same moment DOGRG was demanding these deep, painful cuts across the rest of the government. And this, right here, this is where the whole thing comes to a head. On one hand, you have one part of the administration pushing to cut spending that directly impacts veterans' health, and on the other, you have another part spending billions on what critics were calling a purely symbolic rebranding,
Those cuts were reported to have immediate, severe consequences, even leading to the cancellation of life-saving cancer trials.
This table really just synthesizes the whole financial tug-of-war that was at the heart of all these policies. You've got a multi-billion-dollar price tag for symbolism, a multi-billion-dollar redirection of funds for troops, and a $500 billion target for savings, all happening at the same time.
So, what's the big picture here? What's the major takeaway? It's really crucial to see that these aren't just three random policies. They're all pieces of a single, interconnected story about a new philosophy of government.
When you really step back and you look at all of them together, a very clear philosophy emerges. It's a fundamental reimagining of the government's priorities, right? An emphasis on projecting overt military strength, a focus on rewarding uniformed service members, and then this aggressive, unapologetic effort to shrink the size and scope of the rest of the federal government.
Ultimately, the sources we have lay out all the facts, the costs, the goals, the consequences, and they really leave us with this essential question to think about. Are these moves a necessary strategic rebranding of American power, or are they a costly and divisive exercise in political theater? Thanks for tuning in.